Yeah, it's a ranch thing.
Hi guys, happy Monday. Oh my goodness. Let's see. I think I'm good with sound. Let Druid give us a sound check. Thank you, Druid. I hope you guys had a good weekend. Some of you were probably with me and Jill during Stitch and Glitch. I think we had quite a few people for Saturday, and even at least one newbie. So that was very exciting. So this weekend, I did bad things to my back, but it's all good. It's all good. I did all the things I should do. Ibuprofen, ice, and it's just sore. It's not hurt, but I moved furniture this weekend. I'm proud of myself. I'm actually going to show a photo, and I was just gonna rip back the curtain, but it's hard to see from here because this light is very much on me, but if I remove my screens, it's like I'm sitting in a cave. So I will show you guys a picture. And I know it's not going to look like much, but let's see. Yeah. It's my new bookshelf. So I think I've told you guys many times, I have there's a shelf right here beside me that is solid as a rock, and it's one of those like cube things. You could get the wire or fabric cube like drawers that go in it, but I just use it as a bookshelf and kind of a crab cabinet. I just kind of shove things in there. But I had gotten another one and it just didn't work out. It was just not stable. So I did a 3-part furniture move this weekend. I removed a small bookcase from an upstairs room, and I'm using it just kind of as an etagere now, just for collectible stuff. So that got moved to a new space. The bad shelf got moved to its new space, replacing the small bookshelf. I had to move some other things, but it's okay. It was piles of stuff that needed to go. And then in its space, I put the new rack. This is by a company called Quantum Storage Systems, and it was pricier than I wanted, but this thing supposedly holds I think every shelf can hold 1,000 pounds or something, and the whole thing and it's just, this is a weird angle that you're seeing it from, but I actually need to hammer the corners down a little bit because the books are taking the weight in the middle, but the corners are still not set. But anyway, this is all my quilt research. I am ashamed to say I have other bookshelves in my house that are also brimming, but there's a few books in here that need to come out. They're more of art books, but they'll go upstairs, and I have an art bookcase in my sort of studio space where my long arm frame is, or it's not a long arm, but my sewing machine and frame. But yeah. And on one hand, I'm kind of horrified. I didn't count the number of books on here as I put them up. And I will reveal that this shelf here, this is actually the second shelf down. So this is the top, and then this is the next shelf down, and then this is the next. These are double stacked. So they're small books, novel size books there's 2 rows of them. But I'm proud. It's all here. I have some stuff upstairs. Like I said, gonna do some switcheroos with art books versus quilt books. But yeah, this was a big undertaking. And getting that shelf, that 3x4 shelving cube thing upstairs for a rickety thing, it was insanely heavy and difficult to maneuver. And I mean, it was no surprise. My son helped me, of course. And I don't know if you guys ever watched Friends, But it's a later episode of Friends where Ross is trying to get a couch upstairs, or maybe it's Rachel. I can't remember. But Ross and Rachel are trying to get a couch upstairs, and like they end up getting it stuck in the middle and have to cut it in half. But there's like every time they get it to a point, Ross is like, pivot, pivot. So that was definitely going on. I have to say, if the thing had been shaped any differently or been any larger, there's no way it would have gone through the doors and up the stairs. But I feel very proud of that. So this is kind of, and the reason why it's at this really wonky angle and it kind of looks almost fisheye is because I'm standing at the corner, like right behind me at my cutting table. My cutting table's still a mess, but I'm tidying that up tonight. So I'll be very proud of that. But this is me standing on the other side of my cutting table, and you can see all my junk on the cutting table, but you can see sort of a picture of it square on. This is Cookie. Cookie is my my dress mannequin, and she currently is wearing multiple costumes, and she has a Creature from the Black Lagoon mask on. But she's the same height and size as me. She is set as like a double me. So if you can imagine, this is me standing here. So that's how tall this bookshelf is. So anyway, I always like to share my wins. It's just the little things, you know. Hey, Robin. Stitch Roadies on YouTube. Oh my goodness, I don't know that channel. I'll have to check it out. Okay, what are we doing today? I struggled all weekend. I was like, what am I going to do on Monday? What am I going to talk about? Because I didn't study anything or really do much on, this weekend other than moving books. But I pulled out a book that I hadn't looked at in a while, and we have looked at it here. Textile Conservation. This is the first edition. There was a second edition released, I think it's 2024. So this is the first edition. It is considered a textbook. So, Robin says it's Anna Bates. She does a Stitch Roadies and a Quilt Roadies channel. I have to check her out. That's someone I've never heard of. So anyway, I'm just really fascinated by textile conservation, and so many of us have old quilts, and whether they're like museum quality or if they're just the family treasures, it's interesting and important to know how to take care of them. And it's unfortunate. I think we see out there in auctions and in antique stores, we see quilts and other types of textiles that just have not been treated well. And that's where we get cutter quilts from. Boo! I hate the term cutter quilt. But beyond quilts is particular, or even clothing, beyond it getting used up in the sense that it's utilized, potentially washed, those things definitely use up textiles, obviously. But the storage of textiles after the fact is definitely something that would impact the life of the object. This, of course, is why museums are weird about what they put out, when they put it out, how long they put it out. Like the Dear Jane, the Jane Stickle quilt that's up in Bennington, Vermont. It only gets shown for a little while, and they make it like it's a big deal when the Jane quilt comes out. People flock to it because it only comes out periodically. They don't leave it on display year round. So, and I think we've all seen quilts also that have maybe been folded up and kept somewhere where, maybe in a bedroom or something where just enough light got in. And when you unfold it, you're like, oh, there's this big faded part of it. So we see that a lot in vintage and antique quilts. So I think it's interesting just to know, like, what are the professionals doing? Jill and I actually have a friend and colleague through AQSG who is a professional textile conservator, and it's always really interesting to talk to her because she, drops bits and pieces of information. So anyway, I thought we would kind of look at this, and then as a kind of a sideline to this, because what I wanted to read to you was a piece it was written by I guess she's head of conservation. I'll have to look and see what her title is. Let's see. Her name is Patricia Silence. I mean, it's spelled like silence. Maybe it's pronounced differently. Silence. I don't know. I like silence. I think she is, because this is a textbook. It doesn't give like super. But she was somebody in conservation at, let's see. No, it doesn't give a little bio of her. But in any event, she's somebody at, who was at Colonial Williamsburg at some point. But I think she might still be there. Like, I saw someplace 30 years. I'm sorry, you guys. I've got this piece of hair that's making me crazy. I don't know where it wants to be. Yeah. In all that, Colonial Williamsburg had a few surprises for me. Now, I grew up in Virginia. I've been to Colonial Williamsburg a bunch of times, and mostly as a kid, hating every minute of it. Because, I mean, I don't know. You take an 8-year-old to look at blacksmiths, they're like, at least back then. You know, I think that programs, interpretation programs have evolved. You know, it's a business. I say business, but it's something my husband is very connected with, because the park system, he's a park manager for the state. And so, you know, 50% of what he oversees are the park spaces, the green spaces, the trails, the camping and the picnic areas and all that stuff. But another little piece of it is interpretation, because here in Maryland, the parks also touch historic areas and historic things. We also have some national parks, which don't really cross over with the state too much, with the exception of a few different places. But in any event, they also will do historical interpretation. So, you know, I guess I have some frame of reference for, you know, this historical stuff, but Williamsburg in general, I just glanced at a couple things this morning, and it kind of surprised me. So here's one little fact that might surprise you, but maybe you guys know, is that Colonial Williamsburg is 100% privately funded. You know, we've been hearing really all year about museums and, you know, arts and humanities organizations losing funding, losing grants. One example is the Quilt Alliance. And if you have any disposable income this year, at the end of this year, please consider donating to a couple of the organizations in our world. Quilt Alliance is one. I have been the recipient of one of their grants, one of their fellowships. And I want to say that one is a privately funded. It was Artist James Fellow for 2024. And so I think that's something that's privately funded that, you know, was not in any danger. But they lost another grant. And I think the thing that really makes me mad, and you guys know I really try not to get political, but the current administration, basically what they did was they canceled all these grants for the humanities, just like, you know, they said it was for this reason or that reason. I won't get into the specifics, but you guys know what I'm talking about. But they basically sent out this form letter. And the form letter basically said things like, we're not going to fund anything that doesn't focus on, I want to say, is it Indigenous Americans, the military, I'm trying to think what else, you know, American patriotism. And the ironic thing is, those are the exact things that the Quilt Alliance is working in, is, you know, American ingenuity in the quilting arts, you know, getting these voices in history. And that, when I read the response they got to, hey, your grant is canceled, and the, you know, not the response, but the communication that came along with it, I was like, are you kidding? Like, nobody read what these grants were. They just went, you know, down the list. Tick, 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 tick. These are all getting canceled. So anyway, long story short, American Quilt Study Group is another, you know, we're member funded, and there are some endowments and grants that are privately funded. But we also have never had to or taken any state or federal funding. So we also are, quote unquote, safe from the administration. So, but where I was getting to is you're here, all years we've been hearing about these things. Colonial Williamsburg was, in hindsight, I see it now, but Colonial Williamsburg was interestingly not ever mentioned because they're not taking any funds from the feds, which is really, I don't know. I mean, honestly, it surprises me. I guess I just accept the fact that humanities are, museums, keeping the lights on, it's expensive, and something like Colonial Williamsburg is not just like a building, a museum. It's a big thing. And, just to the realization to me that they don't take any, it's all private. So I thought I'd read a couple things about that just to, because it's interesting. And then we can get into the textile conservation. So the first thing I'll read to you, this is a message from the president, and I think that this is a while back. I feel like this is probably at least a decade ago, if not more. But it does give us a little bit of perspective. So at this time, and I don't know if he still is, but the president of the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation was Colin G. Campbell. And this is what he says or said at this time. And again, it's not dated, but he references 2011. So I feel like this could be 2012, maybe. It's a little more than 15 years. Okay. Or about 15 years. I can't do my math. Less than 15 years. Okay. So Colin G. Campbell says, the evolution of Colonial Williamsburg. After months of study and strategic preparation, in November 1927, John D. Rockefeller Jr. directed his associates to expand the embrace of his astonishing philanthropy to include the restoration of the core of 18th century Williamsburg. It was the last time anyone would have an opportunity to return a colonial American capital to the past of Washington and Jefferson, and the first time anyone would attempt anything on such a scale. Now, what he's not mentioning with the Rockefellers, let me skip backwards just a little bit to tell you that the very beginning of Williamsburg is not actually Rockefeller, it's W.A.R. Goodwin. So, the restoration of Williamsburg began with the Reverend Dr. W.A.R. Goodwin, and it's Warren something Rutherford Goodwin, rector of Bruton Parish Church, sharing his vision for Williamsburg with philanthropist John D. Rockefeller Jr. So this was like a small thing, and he shared this with Rockefeller because, they're friends. So sharing with Rockefeller and his wife, Abby Aldrich Rockefeller, in 1924. What began as a modest initiative to preserve Williamsburg's 18th century buildings soon blossomed into a full-scale restoration of the former colonial capital. And what's really interesting, just what a little bit I know kind of about the history over the years. At the very beginning, they had like a very Disney Epcot type of existence where nothing was really period accurate, like the costumes and all that kind of stuff. Whereas today, if you have looked at pictures of Williamsburg or have actually gone there, you know that they are very, very like stepped right out of time. They make a big deal of accuracy. So in 1932, Colonial Williamsburg opened its first public exhibition building, the reconstructed Raleigh Tavern, where patriot members of Virginia's House of Burgesses met and cast votes during the Revolutionary era in defiance of the colony's royal governors. In 1934, hostesses working at the reconstructed tavern became the first Colonial Williamsburg staff to appear in period costume. So 1934. In honor of President Franklin D. Roosevelt's visit for the dedication of the Duke of Gloucester Street. Within 2 months, every Colonial Williamsburg hostess would wear 18th century costume. So back to President Campbell's discussion here. So let's see. Okay, this will give me an actual date. Let me do the math here. This is sad. I have to do the math to figure out what... So, okay, so this was 2012 with this letter. Oops. sec. Sorry. My page went weird. Okay. So this is 2012. In the 85 years since, millions of Americans have helped Mr. Rockefeller advance the mission of his undertaking, that the future may learn from the past. By contributing their hopes, their time, and their dollars, large and small, Colonial Williamsburg started essentially as a city-sized architectural exhibit and collection of house museums. It became what one of my predecessors called a laboratory of liberty. It has evolved into a vibrant, integrated, and technologically sophisticated educational institution with lessons to teach to the nation and to the world. And I mean, 2012, it's very technologically advanced. And since then, even more. Mr. Rockefeller said at first that he would pledge up to $5 million for the enterprise. Before his death in 1960, his grants totaled nearly 14 times that. Yet the project was still growing, still developing, still evolving, as indeed it still is, and the demands of stewardship grew as well. It is a blessing that later Rockefeller family members, notably Mr. Rockefeller's son David and his granddaughter Abby O'Neill and her husband George, continued the family's generosity to Colonial Williamsburg. David's gifts have supported historic area program renewal, the Presidential Discretionary Fund, and the National Endowment for the Humanities, We the People Challenge Grant. Abby and George have made gifts for Bassett Hall's restoration, the John D. Rockefeller Jr. Library, an educational outreach endowment, and 2 endowed positions. Throughout the decades, the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation has prospered with the support of other benefactors who in their own ways have been just as generous as its founding members. They have come forward to sustain and improve an organization dedicated to making better citizens by advancing the knowledge of history, the cause of citizenship, and the principles of representative government. And so it goes on later. He goes on to talk about more people that, have donated money, underwritten projects, and so on. So I won't read all that. But I think it's really interesting what he's saying there. And it's kind of like, All right. So before we get to the textile conservation book, I was going to read a few things to you about areas of expertise and conservation. And while I do that, I will share my screen so you can just see something more interesting than my talking head. This is the historic trades and skills page of the Colonial Williamsburg website. So I thought this was a pretty good reel that they've got on here. So this is really interesting. So their areas of expertise, they have architectural preservation, archaeology, history and research, digital education, historic trades and skills. They have a museum, theater, and interpretation. They have the collections. They have the conservation department. And then they have the John D. Rockefeller Jr. Library. So these are all major areas that define the inner workings. So in the conservation department, Colonial Williamsburg's vast collections of decorative, useful, architectural, and archaeological objects and fragments are analyzed, examined, treated, and documented by our team of conservation professionals. The conservation department includes 7 media-specific labs, a materials analysis lab, and the largest preventative conservation team in North America. Conservators, technicians, aides, interns, and volunteers work in our 75,000 square foot state-of-the-art collections building on the Bruton Heights campus, the historic area, the art museums of Colonial Williamsburg, and the Campbell Archaeology Center. Their mission is to get our collections in stable condition, glean and share information on construction, materials, and evidence of use and age, and work with colleagues to make the collection accessible for visitors and scholars in a sustainable way. So I'm going to skip over some of them, but they're they're super interesting. So they've got the archaeological materials, material analysis, which is literally like the machines and the things that they like, scan and test and all that stuff. Like it's like the crime lab of history. Objects, which, just as a note, they are dealing with things as tiny as a silver teaspoon all the way up to a ship's figurehead. So like the thing on the front of a ship. So those people I'm sure their job is fascinating. They've got people that are dealing specifically with the paintings, people dealing specifically with the paper. Then they have preventative department, and I'm going to read to you what they say about them because it's kind of interesting what they do. And then we've got the textiles, and then upholstery being separate from the textiles. So this is interesting. So back on preventative, they say light, humidity, temperature, pollutants, pests, and even humans themselves can cause objects to deteriorate. While conservators often have difficult challenges in stabilizing objects once they are damaged, they also set great store by the adage that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and put an equal amount of effort into trying to prevent damage from occurring in the first place. At Colonial Williamsburg, much of this work is carried out by the Preventative Conservation Team, which includes the Historic Interiors Collections Care, or HICC staff. Their primary work is done outside the lab, in historic area buildings, the art museums of Colonial Williamsburg, and collection storage areas. They clean, check for pests, and track environmental conditions such as humidity, temperature, and light levels. They work with the Historical Architectural Resources Department to ensure that all is well in the historic structures and collaborate with facilities maintenance to ensure that the best possible environment is maintained in Colonial Williamsburg's historic houses and museums. And then this is the part that's fascinating. They make realistic artificial food to use on historic tables, enabling the foundation to talk about foodways in the past without attracting pests in the present. Preventative conservation team members also help curators install exhibits and design and build customized containers to protect objects in storage or when shipping loans to other museums. That is a really broad bunch of tasks, and I would assume within this department they have people that specialize, but like, wow, all of those different things that they get to do in that department are really interesting. Okay, so the textiles. The Textile Conservation Laboratory, which we're specifically going to look at their stuff. And I think that is where, oh gosh, what is her name again? Patricia Silence. I think that must be where she is or was working. So the Textiles Conservation Laboratory treats a wide range of collections objects made from fabrics. These include costumes, samplers and needlework pictures, quilts and coverlets, printed textiles, and home furnishings such as curtains and carpets. Typical treatments involve examining the object, cleaning it, stabilizing or supporting it, and preparing it for storage or display. Because many of the textiles in Colonial Williamsburg's collections are very large and must be treated lying flat, this lab has the largest dedicated space among the conservation labs. The bulk of the lab space is occupied by large flat surfaces, which can be partially disassembled to allow access to specific areas of the object being treated while still providing support for the entire piece. So they're talking about like, you'd lay a bedspread or a quilt out or curtains, and nothing is dangling, nothing is draping. It's completely flat. And then the upholstery people, this is also very interesting. The Upholstery Conservation Lab provides analysis, documentation, and the appearance of historically accurate upholstery for the Foundation's collection of furniture. So appearance. The frames of upholstered furniture often retain information about the original fabric that was used, the number of times the item was upholstered, and I mean like probably reupholstered, and the way in which the upholstery was attached, even after the piece had been reupholstered. The clues can be small, such as tiny pieces of fabric caught in tack holes, or large, the patterns that nail holes make as they sweep across the piece. The challenge for the lab is to save the original evidence while still presenting the piece as it once would have looked. Colonial Williamsburg's conservators have developed a non-intrusive upholstery system. The fabric covering looks as it should and retains the evidence beneath. And so there's actually a picture here. Let me show you what this woman is doing. Let's put it on top of here. She's putting this piece over, like it is it's like it's upholstered to like some kind of inner kind of thing, and she's just like sitting it down on top, like it's not actually attached like with nails permanently. So this must be like, it must be like an outer shell kind of thing that they're doing. I thought that was really interesting. So okay. And then they have wooden artifacts, so I would assume that those people may also overlap some. You know, like upholstery and textiles kind of overlap, I guess. And then I can see upholstery and wooden things overlapping. So I would assume that a lot of these professionals work together quite frequently. So, all right. Bear with me while I get recombobulated. So many screens. Okay. Now. Hey, BFD. Oh, so you've worked at 501c3 historic sites. Yeah. Oh, gosh. I'm so sorry. Your wife just lost her job as an educator. You know, I just feel like education, training, these are the things that go first, and it's always impossible for us to get it back, you know. But historic sites are just, they're such wonderful places, and you know, the rewriting of history really bothers me. I won't get into it because it's very political, and political on both sides of the spectrum. So yeah. Let's talk about textile conservation, shall we? So this is the book, Textile Conservation, Advances in Practice, edited by Francis Leonard and Patricia Ewer. And it's a British book. And what I found was interesting is I was paging through it because I knew that there was a newer edition of it. The second edition came out, like I said, I think it was last year. And you know, it's not like a super thick book, and it's soft cover, but it is expensive, like hella expensive, because it's a textbook. And I hate that. It does have those thin textbook pages, so it probably could be thicker if it had like different pages. But what I think is really interesting is this is the Indian reprint, and it says this edition has been authorized by Elsevier, which is the textbook company. That's their little thing there. For sale in the following countries: India, Pakistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh. Sales and purchase of this book outside these countries is not authorized. It is illegal. So I have committed an illegal act by buying this book because I am not in any of these countries. And the person who sold it to me, which I think was a rare bookstore or something, they too have committed a crime. So I'm going to go ahead and just keep committing crimes and read directly from this book. So I am sorry, but sometimes in defense of being a good citizen, we must commit acts of bad citizenry. So, but like I said, this is written by Patricia Silence, and this is one of the case studies. And I thought it was just, you know, I've skimmed it. I haven't read it in detail, but it gets into kind of all of the things that they face at Colonial Williamsburg. Now, I think there could be an updated version of this in the new edition. As I was doing some searching, I did see a reference. I think it was to the abstract of this case study that had a 2024 date on it. But I think for the most part, like it's still accurate information. So I don't think I'm like telling you anything that's inaccurate. So let's go back to something more interesting than my big head. Oh gosh, where did I? The conservation department. Uh-oh. I think I I lost the page. I closed it, didn't I? Oh, bother. Okay. Let me find this again. No, not that one. Here we go. So you can watch this fun little video of some conservation stuff instead of me. And there is a lovely quilt that is in one of the little clips. All right. So as I said, this is from Textile Conservation Advances in Practice, first edition. And this is case study 5A, Preventative Conservation at the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation by Patricia Silence. Introduction. The Colonial Williamsburg Foundation, she calls it CW. I might start calling it that because Colonial Williamsburg it's a mouthful. It's like rural juror. So the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation is located in the Tidewater region of Virginia, USA. Since its establishment in 1928 as the restored 18th century colonial capital of Virginia, the historic area, CW has grown to include 2 modern museum buildings and an 80,000 square foot purpose-built collections and conservation facility. Okay, so what we just read on their website of current information says it's 75,000 square feet, so a little difference there, but still big, gigantic. The historic area is sited on over 300 acres and includes 88 18th century buildings and 300 reconstructed buildings. That's crazy. That's a lot. CW's educational mission, that the future may learn from the past, is fulfilled in part by the restoration, preservation, and maintenance of the historic area and collections. CW's collections include more than 10,000 textiles and costumes. The objects range from 17th century European and Asian export fabrics to 18th through 21st century costume, home furnishings, and folk art. They are displayed in 2 purpose-built museums, the DeWitt Wallace Decorative Arts Museum, commissioned in 1985, and the Abby Aldrich Rockefeller Folk Art Museum, 2007, and stored at the museums as well as at the Bruton Heights Wallace Collections Building, 1997. Study and conservation takes place at Bruton Heights. Additionally, superbly crafted reproduction textiles are displayed and worn throughout the CW historic area, enhancing the interpretation of the oldest and largest living history museum in the USA. So yeah, reproduction textiles there are actually a big deal. And I have talked with a number of people and know a few people that have actually, done some of the costume type stuff. But not costume that the interpreters wear, but the costume type stuff that's on display, like in the shops. And the like surface design type stuff, they have created specific like fabric lines that are Colonial Williamsburg inspired and like, directly reproducing stuff that's there. I think you could buy some of it at some point throughout the years. I'm trying to remember. I don't know if my mom had any of it or not, but I want to say it was something that happened in, like maybe in the 90s. I'm really not sure. You guys might know. So put something in the comments if you do. Okay. It is well understood that exposure and use of textiles accelerates damage, yet their function as educational tools and documents mandates that they are accessible. Antique textiles are very rarely displayed in the historic area due to the rigors of open display and their irreplaceable nature. While reproduction textiles can be replaced, a tremendous amount of highly skilled labor is required to make them. The fabrics, trims, and other components are expensive and often difficult to acquire. Now, to put a pin in that, we've got in the United States small pockets of people that do this labor, this highly skilled labor. For instance, Rabbit Goody is a weaver who owns a bunch of equipment that is defunct everywhere else in the world. And she weaves not just stuff like that would work at Colonial Williamsburg, but other historic properties, as well as movies, and so on and so on. So, it is expensive, because it's tedious labor, and she is like the only one. I don't know that she's the only one in the United States, but she is like up there as like the top producer. So she's just an example of the reproduction stuff. And then, then there's the people that actually sew and make things. There is a modern passementerie maker. She, but I can't remember if she's in the U.S. or not. I think she's American, but she did her study in passementerie being trimmings. She did her study in the UK with a passementerie house, and they actually just went out of business, I think, this year. So, some of these places are, they're going out of business. They're not even, available anymore, these niche producers. But this woman, and I'm totally blanking on her name. She wrote a book called Passementerie. I think it came out last year. But so that would be like a source of somebody that could create like bespoke materials. If you needed a trim for upholstery or for a gown or, some type of like, window treatment or something. But again, it's highly skilled labor. And it costs a lot of money, to put these things together, for sure. Okay. Colonial Williamsburg embraces the concept of preventative conservation for a number of practical reasons, not the least of which is the cumulative benefit to these textiles. CW has a comprehensive preventative conservation program currently led by a former trained textile conservator. I think maybe it's supposed to be a formally trained. Maybe? I don't know. The program covers several general types of collections: archaeological, historical, fine art, and architectural. So we just talked about those a minute ago. Note that textiles and fibers are found in all of these categories. The approach is necessarily collaborative and engages every department and trade of this large institution. So I was right. That they overlap with each other. So they have to work closely together. Catastrophic risk, such as fire or severe weather and damage due to environmental problems, are addressed through careful preparation, education, monitoring, and communication, as well as active engagement with the collection. The backbone of this program is its preventative conservation team of approximately a dozen technicians, aides, and custodians. Only a dozen. That's interesting. I would have thought that there would have been more people, but then again, even without state and federal funding, obviously they still work on pretty tight budgets, I'm quite certain. So got to be some overlap then if there's only a handful of people. Each day, they inspect, clean, and gather data everywhere collections are kept. They're responsible for materials testing, light management and monitoring, and collections handling for storage, movement, and installation. The members of this team maintain interaction with colleagues in the collections, conservation, and museum division and CW staff throughout the foundation. So, okay, let me... take a break there. A little sip. I ran out of my sustainable straws and I had to use a bendy straw. No. It's dribbled on my desk. Okay. So, why preventative conservation? A background in textile conservation provides one with a broad and deep understanding of agents of deterioration. Textile conservators are also keenly aware that conservation treatment, particularly efforts to restore appearance and structural properties close to original condition, are labor intensive and rarely result in an object suitable for use. So, yeah, I mean, conservation treatment, well, I mean, conservation is different than restoration. So, in collecting institutions, the expense of long treatments and prioritization of time spent towards preparing textiles for display limits the list of what can be treated. In the case of conservation or disaster triage for privately held collections, the monetary value of a textile may be weighed against the cost of treatment, and many important objects are not conserved at all. Prevention is, in fact, less expensive than bench conservation. Its global approach might be seen as democratic, preserving far more cultural property than individual treatments. Preventative care ensures that more material is available for future generations to study and assess as collections grow, tastes change, and value judgments evolve. You know, it's funny, like, prevention, I mean, we hear about this in our health. Preventative maintenance is always a thing, you know, preventative maintenance for your car, preventative maintenance for your health and your body. Disaster preparedness and response. Tidewater, Virginia is susceptible to intense storms, particularly hurricanes, and all sites have the potential of structural or mechanical failure resulting in disaster. CW has an emergency response plan that considers both man-made and natural disasters. In the plan, each building is considered, and aspects of response and who is responsible for these tasks are clearly described. The preventative conservation team keeps emergency bins stocked with supplies in a number of locations so that immediate response by staff is possible to prevent further damage. Training in object handling is performed with all collection staff members, ensuring that necessary collections protection and moves can be done properly and quickly when an emergency occurs. Triage decisions, such as freezing or controlled drying, are made by specialist conservators and curators. Hurricanes are fairly predictable, and several days prior to possible landfall are spent tracking the storm and making preparations to protect the collection. Textiles are removed from harm's way and packed in our most secure storage sites. Larger objects are moved away from windows, which are shuttered as possible, and covered with plastic or Tyvek. Generators are in place and kept fueled in case of power failure, which can last for several days. This emergency power supply only runs essential pumps, egress lights, and a few outlets that might be used for fans or dehumidifiers. Historic area sites may reopen when the power is out and recovery of the area is in progress. The museums and collection storage areas are kept closed and secure, as conditions will stay fairly stable until power is restored. And I guess, like, these storage areas, they're so carefully monitored, like as far as light and humidity and temperature and all that kind of stuff. I guess it's almost like the refrigerator. You know, if you have a power outage, they always say, like, keep your refrigerator closed, because if the power isn't out that long, you know, your refrigerator takes care of itself. Hey, Megan. Humidity here is also tough to deal with. Yeah, I can't remember where in the world you are, but humidity is a problem in so many areas. Like, I mean, any place coastal, humidity is going to be an issue. And I would say, I always feel like the East Coast is more humid than the West Coast, but, oh gosh, you're in Williamsburg. Yeah, okay. So having grown up in Virginia, yes, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, all of those coastal states, Florida, I'm sure the humidity and hurricanes and stuff are always going to be, you know. So fire and associated damage. And, you know, water damage and fire damage, I think, are probably, well, yes, she just says this. Fire and associated water damage present a significant risk to collections. So, yes. And we think about, you'll always hear, all the things that have happened in the past that are so bad. So the 1890 U.S. Census basically doesn't exist because of a fire. So in the late 1800s, early 1900s, all of this conservatorship was not in place. I because I'm not a museum professional, I couldn't even begin to tell you when conservation attempts like really ramp up. I'm guessing it's probably the 50s and 60s. I think the post-war years saw, obviously there's a lot more money out there in the post-war years. So, the 50s and 60s. And I think, and that's the time period also when Colonial Williamsburg got serious about being like much more accurate, like with costuming and things like that. But yeah, I there's just a certain point, I guess, when museums, incrementally got really serious. And I would assume that it's like the big ones started with it. Putting things behind glass and not letting people touch stuff and not like slicing open mummies and things like that, that's only been recently. Anyway. All right. Fire and associated damage. Fire and associated water damage present a significant risk to collections. After every effort to prevent fire is employed, fire detection and means of suppression must be in place. With a hurricane, like she says, you've got a couple days notice, maybe, probably. You can at least take some, preventative steps. But with fire, what are you going to do? You can't let me grab the quilts. That's not going to work. CW uses a wide variety of fire detection and suppression throughout its many buildings, as each building and its use must be carefully evaluated for these important elements to fit and function properly. In the new museums and collection sites commissioned since the 80s, wet pipe fire suppression is in place, replacing failed original pre-action and dry pipe systems. Pre-action systems are designed to prevent accidental discharge by requiring activation of both a heat or smoke detector and an automatic sprinkler before operating. That's interesting. And I guess that's to keep you get some kind of electrical thing that maybe has a little bit of smoke, but you don't have a fire, there's no heat, but that little bit of smoke might be able to set off something. And you don't want that. If there's not a real fire, you don't want your sprinklers raining down on your collections. Dry pipe systems are comprised of air-filled pipes designed to fill with and discharge water following the activation of a local sprinkler head. Wet pipe systems are maintained full of water. Pipes used in systems that maintain air pressure are quite susceptible to corrosion. Oh gosh, then you've got leaks, right? All fire suppression systems require careful and regular maintenance in order to operate as required. Many textile conservators are adamant that water above their collections presents too great a risk in the event of activation of the fire suppression system. Oh my gosh, that's such a, oh gosh. On one hand, my gosh, you don't want to potentially lose things to fire, but then you also don't want to lose things to fire suppression. However, CW has come to the conclusion that the benefit of stopping a fire as quickly as possible reduces risk of catastrophic loss to people and collections. Less water is used to suppress a blaze in the early stages, and therefore less material is susceptible to smoke and charring. Most of the textile collections in storage are kept within cabinets that should limit water damage should the systems go off. While gaseous suppression is sometimes used in small and self-contained textile storage areas, it is rarely an option in a more open exhibit space. Water backup for these systems is still recommended in case the suppression agent is exhausted before a fire is extinguished. So I'm guessing these are, I don't know, what kind of gas is used to suppress fire? Do you guys know? I don't know any firemen or, people that are in this profession, so... I know there's all kinds of different, materials that they use to put out fires depending on what they are. You never throw water on a grease fire, right? You have to use different suppression and extinguishing agents. Mist systems are very expensive and require significant maintenance and space for equipment within the building. A properly installed wet pipe fire suppression system is effective and the least expensive type to install and maintain. Building and mechanical systems design. Woohoo! This is some really riveting stuff, huh? Textile or preventative conservators have a great deal to offer in building design, whether new construction, remodeling, or repair. Conversations and collaboration should begin with the initial concept and continue through design and construction. This allows for integrating conservation. Good Lord. Conservative, conservation, and conversation. And she's got it all in the same sentence. This allows for integrating conservation concerns into the process, reduces expensive change orders and retrofitting, and gives the conservative an understanding of how the building and its mechanical systems work. This is the model employed at the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. Rather than asking the conservator to write specifications that may be unrealistic or impractical, or the architectural team to create a highly functional exhibit, storage, or treatment space without understanding the nuances of working with collections, ongoing mutual education ensues. The result of this expanded design-build process is essential simplification and economy based on priorities of collections safety and institutional sustainability. Those who use and maintain the building are familiar with the rationale for materials, mechanical and safety equipment, such as the aforementioned fire suppression. Although mechanical engineering is typically beyond the scope of conservation training, it plays a significant role in collections environment. Why mechanical engineering? Oh, Marianne says, well, there's carbon dioxide fire extinguishers. Okay. Yeah, carbon dioxide is... Yeah. Okay. So fire needs oxygen, carbon dioxide gas, right? Okay. Well, that's a duh. I should have thought about that. But yes, oxygen is a problem. So if you take away the oxygen and fill it with inert gas, that doesn't harm the textile, and it is also suppresses fire. I get it. That makes sense. So mechanical engineering, if you didn't know, involves the HVAC system. This is something I actually know about because I had to create training for apprentices in HVAC and electrical engineering. CW has reaped benefits from including their preventative conservator in HVAC, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, HVAC design, operation and repair discussions, and decisions. All parties have increased empathy and understanding of each other's professional challenges and goals. That's good. Because, often you get into situations where people aren't kind to each other, right? And when they have conflicting priorities. Establishing rapport that allows for questions and sharing concerns has been instrumental in creative problem solving. An example is management of the environment during periods of equipment shutdowns due to maintenance or failure. The conservator has access to view the building's automated systems and can provide suggestions that reduce pressures on the mechanical plant by closing certain galleries or turning off hot exhibit lights. Collaboration of this sort ensures the entire foundation that proper collections care will continue as fuel prices rise and greenhouse gas reduction becomes more important. Gosh, and 15 years on, you wonder what else has become important. Changes and compromises can be made with confidence that all sides of the issues have been explored and considered. Technological advances will improve mechanical performance, and excellent building design enhances efficiencies. Conservators must continue material science research in order to provide practical temperature and relative humidity guidelines, including establishments of a realistic standard for desired rate of change in both aspects. It is most likely that these guidelines will vary depending on the climate of the region where the collections reside. And as we have already established, the Tidewater region of Virginia is hot and sweaty a lot. I would say there are even humidity issues in the winter, particularly when you're very, very close to the coast. you just don't necessarily have the dry conditions that you would have like kind of in an interior sort of geography. Lighting management and design. So this is where we at home can maybe take a little bit of information from the professionals. So lighting management design. Textiles are particularly susceptible to damage from light in every range, from infrared to visible to ultraviolet. The challenge for conservators, designers, and building managers is to use only the light that is needed for optimum viewing of collections and safe movement in the building. So that's why our museums are very dark. And it sucks to try and take pictures. Because you've got that glow and then you've got all the darkness around the quilt. Like, you guys have seen many of our pictures. Sometimes our phones can pick up good lighting and sometimes they cannot. There are a number of arguments for reducing light to essential levels. Energy savings, less heat. Most lamps currently in use for exhibits generate a significant amount of infrared. Now I'm wondering, this book was written in 2011. We had LEDs in 2011, but I'm wondering now, 15 years on, if that type of light is being used more often. LEDs don't give like very pretty light. It's like a harsh kind of, it's very white. So I'm wondering, what changes may have taken place since then. So less heat, fewer intrusions for changing bulbs, and improved environment for light-sensitive objects. If a careful assessment of desired light levels combined with duration of exposure is employed, exhibits can stay up longer, reducing labor and exhibit expenses. Now that's interesting. I guess what I've learned from Jill, let me roll it back a minute. Because I have done volunteer stuff for like quilt shows. So like I volunteered for QuiltCon. I've volunteered for a number of things where, put up and take down. I have experience there. And it's very physically demanding. Like at QuiltCon, these aren't fragile really. But there are standards. Like you're not just ripping quilts off the wall. You have to take them down carefully and fold them and they don't touch the floor, et cetera, et cetera. That is very, very just physically demanding to do that, all that work. And you do that in teams. So when you think about in museums, smaller staff, and they're also dealing with things that are fragile. And they have to, I guess, pull out all of the equipment and stuff and all the things when they change a display out. So it makes sense to want to keep things, out as long as possible, like, and not have to constantly swap out displays. But the longer you leave something out, the potential for damage from light is inevitable. CW has found a number of ways to reduce light in exhibit environments. In the historic area, shutters, 18th century style Venetian blinds. I'm wondering what those look like. I wonder if they're those, what do you call them? I actually have them. They're like just a flat piece, but it's kind of long and it has slats in it. It's a textile and it's got like wooden slats in it and then rings. What are those called? Oh gosh, you guys, I'm like, cannot think of anything today. Anyway, but they have the rings, and when you pull the cord, the cord through the rings causes it to pleat up. So they're slats in there, but they're sort of different. Roman shades. That's what I'm trying to think. So I'm wondering if that's what 18th century style Venetian blinds are, kind of like Roman shades. I'm wondering. What do you guys think? Okay, so the shutters, these 18th century style Venetian blinds, filtering plastic film and plexiglass. So plexiglass, obviously, over the exhibits, the objects themselves in types of containers. But I'm also wondering, in some cases, with this filtering plastic film, where they might put that on the actual windows, depending on, if we're talking about like a historic building that has original glass in it. I don't know if they would put anything on that glass in any way, but I could see them I could see that happening somewhere. But what I'm thinking of, I live in an old house, and I think if I had more of a show house, I mean, none of my quilts are in any place that's in danger of light, because just the way, I mean, I have big windows, like big, tall, skinny windows in the front of the house, and then a few windows on the sides. So most of where my quilt storage that I still have here in the house, not near any windows. So, I don't really have any issues there, but I could see, if I had more windows, putting up like that weather plastic. And I know it's not very pretty, but I do think you can get kinds that are a little less like ugly. But I could see, in a modern setting, using something like that, if you don't have the type of windows, like modern windows that have some UV protection. I know like double pane, double glaze, has that kind of stuff, but I actually do have new windows in my lower level. So, and where appropriate, 20th century style insect screen. Are those just screens? I mean, are we talking about like when you open your window and you either have the storm window or you have the screen? I grew up with those, again, growing up in Virginia. We got lots of bugs, flying bugs. Oh, and so you do want screens on your windows when you open them. I was surprised to visit other parts of the country that don't necessarily do that. They open their windows and it's like you could stick your arm right out. So I'm assuming they're talking about 20th century insect screens as like literally in the windows. So these things all help reduce natural light that come through the windows of the buildings. Since an 18th century experience is desired, traditional covers and seasonal protection, such as mosquito netting for household items, help protect furnishings. Interiors are lit at night or on dark days with candles or high-quality electrical candles, which have bulbs that provide the equivalent of 1-foot candle. The Abbey Aldrich Rockefeller Folk Art Museum has a very sophisticated automated lighting control system that is programmed to turn on walk-through lights when staff is in the building and exhibit lights during the hours the museum is open to the public. So it sounds like what they're saying here is so it's automated. So during the hours when it would only be staff working there, I'm assuming walk-through lights are the ones that turn on with motion detection. So, have you ever worked in an office that has those? And you're in there late at night, or the bathroom, and you're in there late at night, and they're set to turn off like after 30 seconds of it's like something like really, really short time, and the lights turn off, and you're like, I'm still here. I'm assuming that's what they mean by walk-through lights. And then exhibit lights would be the ones that just stay on, and so it's an automated system that's turning those on and off. That's cool. You don't have to rely on a person to remember to do that. 2 small windows are on the north side of the building. They are equipped with blackout shades that open only when the museum is open to the public. A large clerestory window provides natural light to one gallery. It is equipped with louvers that adjust more or less open based on readings from 4 light meters on the walls of the room. Light monitoring in these special situations has resulted in an understanding of where light and dark pockets can be found. The exhibit designers use this information provided by the preventative conservator to create exhibits that can last more than a few months without overexposing collections. So they've almost taken like a sort of a scientific kind of, like, they know their spaces well enough. They've analyzed their spaces. So they know, I guess if there's a secret little spot that they can stick something in that is not going to capture a lot of light, I guess. Attempts to reduce light at the more immediate viewer level have included visitor-activated lights, switches that the viewer turns on, and automated automated motion sensors. With the former, some visitors do not turn on the lights, resulting in a less than ideal experience. Motion sensors, however, have been very well received. Their use varies from entire rooms to sections of exhibits and individual objects. I've been to lots of museums that do that. Kind of as you walk past, things will light up and then pretty quickly will turn off if you're not standing right there. I've noticed the cold cases at Target do that too. If you walk past like where the creamer and ice cream and stuff is, it'll light up, and then as you walk away, it turns off. An advanced time meter associated with one gallery, illuminated by motion sensor activation, has yielded data indicating that the lights are on in the gallery about 45% of the time that lights are on throughout the rest of the building. This can allow for either higher foot candles, meaning a better viewing experience, or longer exhibit time, saving exhibit labor and materials, or a combination of both. Now we're getting to an interesting one. Pest prevention and treatment. Biological agents, from fungi to insects and rodents, can damage or destroy textiles. The first line of defense against these threats is to maintain an environment that does not support them, typically dry and clean. Recent acquisitions and items with suspected biological activity are quarantined and treated if necessary before being brought into the collection's environment to prevent cross-contamination. This is such a big deal, you guys, and this is something even collectors like myself. I have had clothing moth problems, and I use the pheromone traps, and it's like, I'm not bringing in very much into my home now, other than the occasional quilt that I've either splurged on or somebody's given me. But for a while there, I was doing a lot of auctions, estate auctions and stuff, for vintage and antique textiles to use in my work. And at one point, I'm trying to think, it's probably been a couple years ago, I had a massive moth infestation, and I think I know it's from a wool coverlet that came from this estate auction. And yeah, I'm still finding stuff where I'm like, oh my God, moth damage. So yeah, those pheromone traps are really good. And if you're not familiar with them, they're good. I mean, just for like, if you have a lot of woolens, it's literally like a little sticky trap. And it kind of folds together like a little cardboard house almost, and it's open on the ends, and it usually has like a cardboard hanger that you can hang it in your closet. And you pull off the tape to expose the sticky surface, and then inside this little foil packet, you open it up, and it's this little teeny piece of like either paper or plastic that is impregnated with the moth pheromone. And they make these for pantry moths too, by the way. I had that problem about 10 years ago. And they attract the moths. Now, they attract the male moth. So the female moths, you kind of have to wait for them to die, and you have to constantly keep an eye on your stuff to make sure like you don't have any eggs, you've brushed your woolens, all that kind of thing. So this is the kind of stuff that I think is good to know about, if you are bringing things into your house. I know a couple of collectors that every single thing they bring in their house goes in the freezer. And I think freezing stuff, there are some types of, pests and other contaminants that freezing does help with. There are others that actually freezing doesn't. So, and I have heard both things about the moths, that freezing is good, but also that freezing doesn't affect like the moth eggs and stuff. So it's something like you have to just be really vigilant if you're bringing things in, and particularly if it's wool. Old wool is just, it's disaster waiting to happen. Monitoring serves to discover and eliminate pest problems while they are small. Staff education encourages everyone to report noted problems and maintain clean and food-free collections areas. This integrated and communicative approach results in less pesticide use and a safer work environment. Preventative conservation, facilities, and landscape staff work closely with a pest control contractor to carry out a comprehensive integrated pest management program. The interior of exhibit and collection storage buildings is monitored by technicians and the pest control contractor. Records of noted activity are kept and trends are noted. Recommendations regarding sealing, building fabric, and pruning vegetation are carried out by CW staff. The pest control contractor applies pesticide only as needed. Tidewater, Virginia can be a very hot and humid place, and mold is everywhere. Keeping collections clean, particularly in the historic area, prevents spores from growing on susceptible objects. When an outbreak of mold is discovered in a textile, the specialist textile conservator treats the object. Following treatment, every effort is made to correct deficiencies in the environment. So I think that's changing the level of humidity, through various means. When objects that can withstand freezing require treatment for insect pests, a dedicated chest freezer is used. Reproduction textiles from the historic area are often frozen as a prophylactic measure prior to returning to storage. Anoxic treatment using oxygen scavengers in barrier film bags is employed when items are too large for the freezer or might be damaged by low temperatures. A leak detector is used to ensure the necessary seal of the oxygen barrier film. And so then she kind of has a conclusion here that I won't read, but yeah, that was really interesting. Now, there's another case study in here I would like to get to another time, and it's about some needlework panels in this particular house in England, Ashholt Hall. So I'd like to get to that one another day, because that one gets into dust monitoring and light monitoring and stuff, sort of different or the way that Colonial Williamsburg does it. So interesting stuff. I hope you've enjoyed that, and it wasn't too overly nerdy. But I think it's just so interesting. I think, I don't know. I just, in my mind, I think about dusty old museums and, that sort of Indiana Jones era of archaeology and stuff. And it, you just think about dusty old Victorian museums, I guess, is what's in my mind. And things are so state of the art now, that it's interesting. So let us now go to our reading. And the pictures, unfortunately, in this book are really not all that exciting. And you know what? We discovered that we were missing a page too. I'll have to go back and see if I can find that page, because that was a bummer. Okay. I'm looking to see where we left off. I know pattern making, we got into that, and we had that missing page. I'm pretty sure that we left off at templates. I'm looking at, yeah, I'm pretty sure this is new. All right. Let us look at another picture, so you don't have to look at my big head. Okay. Now, as a reminder, we are reading Traditional Quilting by Mavis Fitzrandolph, which was written in 1954, and it is primarily 99% focused on south of Wales and north of England quilting. This is the two areas that she studied, focused on, interviewed people from. So what you're looking at here are some examples of circle templates, and let's read. So every North Country quilter to whom I have talked has a collection of templates for marking patterns. They are cut from card or stiff paper, or sometimes from plywood or tin. She will have the units which she uses most often in several different sizes. Some of the templates probably came from her mother or grandmother. Others she has made herself, and some may have been cut by her husband or son. There are some borrowing of templates, but generally a quilter regards them as her copyright. Though when she notes an unfamiliar and attractive pattern unit on any quilt she happens to see, she will go home and bother with brown paper, as one of them put it, until she has cut the template. So I guess brown craft paper being something that, you know, packages are wrapped in and was probably like a recyclable item. The templates give the outline of the shapes and the pattern, and filling is put in freehand. So what we looked at in the picture she had from the earlier part of the chapter, where it showed the quilter just marking around the outside, and I think the one we saw was, I think it was actually like a feather sort of garland type thing, but like she do the marking on the outside, and maybe the template might be cut out on the inside to do that marking, but then like these little connecting lines she would have to draw in freehand, or, you know, needle mark in there freehand. Mrs. F. Fletcher remembers that when she went to live in Weardale some 20 years ago, she used to watch Mrs. Foster, who kept the village shop at Warehead, and who had been apprenticed to one of Miss Sanderson's pupils, drawing quilt tops on the counter, using a few templates, but marking a great deal of the elaborate scroll work by eye. In Wales, the usual method of marking a quilt is to measure that material before it is put in the frame and indicate the center and perhaps a few other features, such as border lines, and sometimes to mark it off into the sections which are to be set up and worked at one time, but to mark the pattern bit by bit only when the work is in the frame. Some Welsh quilters use no templates and mark the pattern merely with the help of their usual tackle. Tailor's chalk, string, a ruler, needles, and thread and pins. Measurement and chalk marks, tacking threads, needle marks, and perhaps a few pins stuck upright are the only guide they needed for sewing quite a complicated pattern. A Carmarthenshire quilter, describing how her mother used to mark her center pattern, said she marked the center and drew a circle with chalk and drew in the spokes. Then she added scallops around the edge. So I think this is sort of what she's talking about, kind of, or this. Certainly many good quilters can do a surprising amount of freehand drawing with firm, flowing lines. But the pattern on the quilt I saw, which had been worked in this way, was noticeably irregular. Miss Eleanor Evans of Carmarthenshire told me that her mother never used chalk. She cut paper templates when she needed them, but often she marked only with pins and sometimes with tacking threads as well. We'll see one of this woman's quilts. It looks like it's pretty far down in the next chapter, so I won't go there right now. But one of her quilts, which is beautifully regular in drawing, Miss Evans herself, when working the spiral pattern generally known in Wales as a rose or round, but called by her a snail creep, and I think what she's just meaning, it's like just a spiral, indicates its center, measures from that, and makes another mark to show where its outer edge will come. She starts stitching in the center and works round and round by eye until she reaches the outside mark. Think about this. And this is something I have never been able to master, hence why I can't quilt out a frame, but a spiral. Think about, you're constantly changing the direction that your needle is going. Like, wow. Those are some skills that you have to develop at the frame. A Cardiganshire quilter uses a template for this pattern to mark only its outermost line and works it in the same way. Some others use a template in spiral form so that the completed pattern is marked. These instances show how much variety in methods of marking there can be, and how rash it would be to say that any one method is correct or even better than others. Did you hear that, Quilt Police? Generally, the Welsh woman seems less concerned to preserve her templates, and you seldom find in Wales the permanent wooden or tin ones. More often they are cut from paper to suit the quilt in hand. Some quilters mark a circle by attaching the end of a suitable length of thread to the center and marking the outline either with the threaded needle or with a piece of chalk tied to the end of the thread. So that's like that. I mean, probably many of us did that as kids. We needed to make a big circle, thumbtack in the center, a piece of string with a pencil, and you mark all the way around. I still do that with my quilts when I do the big spirals. A long straight line may be marked by stretching a chalked string taut above the material and plucking it sharply. This is a carpenter's chalk plumb line, a plumb line. So basically it just, hangs or stretches, and it's coated in chalk from inside its container that you pull it out and and it leaves a chalk mark. My dad used this a lot because he was in the building trades. But I remember a friend of mine seeing my dad's plumb line, and he was working on a project, and I'm like, what is that? It was such a bizarre thing. And I was like, just a thing with a chalk. I don't know. But I would assume back in the day when people had lots of tools, like I would say households did a lot of their own repairs and things. So, one of those plumb lines would probably be like normal, toolbox kind of tool. In both districts, plates or kitchen pans can be brought into use instead of a template to mark a circle. I use plates often. A plate is a great way to start off a circle, a concentric circle. The fun we were having making designs, said an old Carmarthenshire quilter reminiscently. Many a time we were putting a pan upside down as to have the circle even. Every quilter has always in hand, on her dresser or in her kitchen, numerous templates in the forms of cups and glasses. We have another picture. Here's the fillings. We're going to get to that in a second, I think. So in the form of cups, glasses, saucers, plates, and pans, for marking various sizes of circle, a shape which is probably found on 90% of Welsh quilts, and certainly on very many North Country ones. A coin from her purse may be used for the smallest size. By the filling, it may be turned into many different patterns. The edge may be scalloped and straight spokes added, or else curved radiating lines, with the lines curving from a point on the circumference instead of from the center. It is a shell. Developed into a spiral, it is a Welsh rose. With a different filling again, it may be a plate or pincushion. One Durham woman reversed the scallops and called it gramophone horn. I guess you could kind of see that, like, in here. There are numerous names for all these patterns. One Northumberland woman calls her scalloped circle template a star and names any pattern made from it a star, whether it is filled in as a rose or a shell. So here are more of those pictures. A feather similar to the one being marked that we've already seen, the lady marking, was called by Mrs. E. Black a three halfpenny, or halfpenny, meaning a 3 halfpenny feather, because she used a penny and a halfpenny to mark the center. Various quilters may use quite different templates to mark the same pattern. For instance, diamonds are usually drawn with an ordinary flat ruler or with a special square section inch-wide one. But some quilters mark them with a large triangular template, starting from a straight border and moving the template along. The usual template for marking the twist or cable is lemon-shaped. So, like, kind of like a big fat orange peel, I guess, is what she means. But Mrs. Mason in County Durham has a different one. It says see above. I'm guessing this. I don't know. I'm not sure what she means. And Mrs. Dixon in Northumberland called the pattern plate because she marked it with a plate. The beautiful and popular pattern of overlapping circles may be marked with a round template. So that's this. That's this. Or I'm sorry, this, I mean. The beautiful and popular pattern of overlapping circles may be marked with a round template. The wine glass used when it is on a small scale gives it one of its names, so wine glass quilting. But many quilters prefer to use a 4-lobed template, which perhaps suggested another of its name, Cuddy's lug, or donkey's ear. Oh, that's interesting. There are parts of certain templates which must be always marked freehand, such as the curlicues on the stamped quilts already mentioned, and the various baskets of flowers, sprays of flowers, and flower pots, so often used in the West Country, as Mrs. Hake showed, and found too on 19th century quilts both in South Wales and in the north of England. Okay, and now we're moving on to materials, chapter 5. So I'll just leave us here until we have another picture. Let's see how far we're going to go here. This is a reasonably long chapter. We'll see how far we get here. We still have a half an hour of reading. But you know me. All right. Let's see how far we get. All right, chapter 5, the materials. The padding. Oh, first thing she says, a quilt is a textile sandwich. So we're using that term, the textile sandwich or the quilt sandwich, as early as 1954. And I'm trying to think, did Florence Peto use it in her book, Historic Quilts? Because that was written in the 30s. I think like it was in 1939, I think. I can't remember. So the quilt sandwich is not a new term. A quilt is a textile sandwich. Between the top and bottom covers is the padding, which is put in for the sake of warmth and is held in place by the stitching. That is the primary purpose of the primary function of the sewing, but its secondary purpose is to form patterns by outlining shapes. In these spaces between the lines of stitching, the padding rises up so that the pattern is in relief. Thus, a padding which is springy and stands up well where it is not held down by stitches will give the quilt a better decorative effect. In Britain, the wool from local flocks must have been the original padding for quilts long before cotton wool, an imported material, came into use. According to the Encyclopedia Britannica, cotton wool was used in England for candle wicks in the 13th century, but did not apparently become well known until much later. Okay, the 13th century. How is England getting cotton in the 1200s? I mean, it has to be through trade, but that's interesting. Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. She's going to tell us. All right, so candle wicks in the 13th century, but did not apparently become well known until much later, since a document of 1621 finds it necessary to describe it as a sort of bombast or down, being a fruit of the earth growing upon little shrubs or bushes, brought into this kingdom by the Turkey merchants from Smyrna, Cyprus, Accra, and Sidon, but commonly called cotton wool. Do you guys remember? I think it was when we read The Heritage of Cotton, where he talked about people who had never seen cotton before and describing it as like these little cotton lambs that grow out of these bushes. They're little sheep on bushes, basically, is how they described them. Evidence for its occasional use in quilts at a date much earlier than is generally supposed is to be found in a compendious regiment or a dietary of health by Andrew Bordy, 1542, which gives this advice: let your nightcap be of scarlet, and this I do advertise you, to cause to be made a good thick quilt of cotton, or else of pure flax, or of clean wool, and let the covering of it be of white fustian, and lay it on the feather bed that you do lie on, and in your bed lie not too hot nor too cold, but in temperance. Although Andrew Bordy was evidently rather a faddist, it is clear that by the middle of the 16th century, raw cotton was well known enough to be considered as a possible alternative to flax or wool for padding quilts. I'm assuming when she says flax, she's meaning like down, I'm guessing. I can't think of what else it would be. And I mean, it's spelled Flocks, so I'm assuming like bird, I guess. The evidence of surviving quilts suggests that wool continued to be the more usual padding, but it is interesting to note Ruth Finley's statement that before the Revolution, that is up to the third quarter of the 18th century, most of the materials for American quilts, including wadding, were imported from England. Although cotton was cultivated in Virginia as early as 1621, it was not a staple crop until about 1760. After that, the local plantations presumably supplied the padding for American quilts. But Florence Peto describes the earliest surviving American quilts, made about 1750 to 1770, as padded with softest wool, whereas Ruth Finley writes that not infrequently quilts were filled with fleece out of necessity rather than choice. Because the fleece was inadequately washed, retained much oil, and gave forth a disagreeable odor in heat or damp atmosphere. I remember that. It's like, why didn't they wash the wool better? I mean, they had water. There are many, many rivers in Virginia. These conflicting statements suggest that some immigrants had been accustomed in their home country to the use of wool, whilst others had never used it before and did not realize how thoroughly it had to be scoured. Had they or their mothers been using cotton wool already in England, or were they Dutch settlers, among who there are said to have been many quilters? In this country, sheep's wool seems to have continued to be the more usual padding until the 19th century. The country woman could probably get it more easily and cheaply than the exotic cotton wool. Any quilt or quilted garment made before about 1800, which I have been able to examine, is padded with sheep's wool. With the great expansion of the cotton textile industry in this country after the perfection of spinning machinery towards the end of the 18th century, cotton wool presumably became generally and cheaply available. So we've got another picture of a lovely quilt. So bear with me. You can kind of see a little bit of the quilting in here too. Make it a little bit smaller so you can see the whole thing. So this is a red and white patchwork quilt made by Mary E. Carr at Blythe, Northumberland, about 1870 to 75, before her 19th birthday, owned by her daughter, Mrs. Grays Brown. The patches are squares of two sizes. The quilted pattern is fitted into these squares in the border. Okay, so towards the 18th century, cotton wool presumably became more cheaply available. At first, it would be the raw product, full of dust and seeds, which the quilter herself would probably card as she had carded sheep's wool. Between 1820, and by the way, I have made batting from raw cotton, and you card it. It's really not very hard. It's just, it takes time. Between 1820 and 1830, the manufacture began in the Manchester district of cotton wool from cotton of shorter staple than that used for spinning. In the factory, it is cleaned and carded, by which process the fibers are all laid one way so that the substance becomes a smooth layer instead of a tangled mass. This would be the cotton wool bought by the pound, which quilters speak of having been used in the old days. Some still use it in preference to wadding, which has been passed through a size trough before drying to give it the skin or backing. Okay, so that's a sizing. So I guess, this is interesting. So she's saying some prefer to use the cotton wool by the pound in preference to wadding. So I'm guessing that specifically the title wadding, at least at this time, the terminology means something that has specifically been created as, the quilt batting, and that it's got a sizing on it to keep it from pulling apart. I would assume that this of course would be a liquid or a wet thing. At some point they start using a scrim, and maybe she'll talk about that or not, but that was some sort of separate thing that then they'd use like a punching sort of machine that would kind of punch the fibers down into the scrim, because you can't, like wool, obviously you can, kind of punch wool and get it to stay together because it's got the little scales on the pieces of, the pieces of animal hair, whereas cotton is smooth and doesn't have that quality. So that scrim, or I guess this sizing that she's talking about, would hold it together. Cotton wool is sold in pound packets, each containing a rolled up sheet which opens out to about 48 by 45 inches. It is bleached or gray, actually a pale off-white, and of various thicknesses and qualities. The best quality is beautifully soft and clean, and its price at the present time is about the same as that of sheep's wool. With care in handling it, it can be spread on the bottom cover of the quilt almost as easily as the skin-backed wadding. The latter is also sold as bleached or gray in various weights and quantities, usually in 12-yard lengths, 36 inches wide. Oh wow, 12 yards by 36 inches. Many quilters prefer it because the skin makes it easier to handle without disturbing its even thickness. There is also a kind of wadding with a harder sized back for use by clothing manufacturers in shoulder pads and other padding. Possibly those quilters who complain that the skin makes wadding difficult to sew through have mistakenly used this kind. Okay. And I'm wondering again if she's talking about this harder sized back is like the separate piece, like the scrim that I was just talking about. By the latter part of the 19th century, cotton wool and wadding had become universally popular for padding quilts. In the North, it seems to have ousted wool earlier and more completely, possibly because all the wadding manufacturers were in the Manchester area and their products may have spread more slowly to South Wales. A few people in the North still remember the use of wool. A Westmoreland woman said that her grandmother, who was born in 1810, had told her that sheep's wool was used before cotton wool, which was cleaner, came in. Another Westmoreland woman knew of its use more recently in a small quilt to go across the foot of the bed as a remedy for cold feet, but never in a large one. I have been told that the old stobbed quilts, I don't know what that is, it's Stobbed, of Weardale, sometimes had a padding of wool between their thick covers, but so this is a tied quilt, but they were not quilted strictly speaking, being merely held together by threads knotted throughout them with the ends standing up in tufts. So a stobbed quilt, I guess, is what we would call a tied quilt. The Mrs. Johnson, so meaning two of them, of Hexhamshire, have an old homespun quilt padded with wool, which was probably made very early in the 19th century. The early American wool interlined quilts described by Florence Peto of Linsey Woolsey, the household staple, strictly a home product, home-dyed blue and buff, quilted with loosely spun linen thread, must have been in the same tradition. The pieces of quilted silk... there's another quilt here I was gonna... Look at this one. So this is stripy, but you can see... This is actually a pretty good picture in my opinion, because you can see the quilting in here. I mean, look at that. That is some really dense patterned, like almost modern looking quilting. And you can really see the spirals. Those are those Welsh spirals. And they're in like a sort of a diamond shaped boundary box. And then you've got these, are they 8-petal flowers? These 8-petaled flowers all throughout. And then fans. These are fans. Very cool. The pieces of quilted silk intended for petticoat of mid-18th century date found in Northumberland are interlined with a thin layer of wool. Cheviot, says the owner, a farmer's wife. I think that's how it's pronounced. Cheviot. And that's the type of sheep. The thin layer of wool dyed to match the blue silk exactly. Oh, that's fancy. So I guess if it beards at all, then it's dyed blue. Some quilted underskirts of the same period in the Victoria and Albert Museum also have their wool padding dyed to match the satin. And one is mysteriously padded with wool of rather deep blue, although the covering materials are of an oyster shade. It must have been left over. Was too much wool perhaps dyed blue for some other quilted work, and the surplus used here because the satin was thick enough to avoid any danger of the blue color showing through. Certainly wool, in its natural tone, does sometimes show through thin silk of a pale color and gives it a slightly dirty look. Another quilt with wool padding, and I would say, well, I mean, we're talking about quilted silk period is for wealthy people. And I'm guessing the dyeing of the batting or the padding elevates it even further. So it's not just like, the nouveau riche, like I'm going to make myself something that looks like the rich people, but also there's a higher level of rich people that can dye the batting in their silk petticoats to match. That's crazy. But also I get it. Let's see. Another quilt with wool padding seen in Westmoreland is believed to have been made in Northumberland in the reign of Queen Anne. This is of parchment-colored silk backed with linen scrim in beautiful condition. Even in the sheep farming districts of Wales, though sheep's wool did not go entirely out of use, cotton wool seems to have been more commonly used by quilters during the last century. Of 48 Welsh quilters, most of them over 50, who replied to a questionnaire, only 6 mentioned no other padding than wool, though over 30 used it sometimes. 25 used blankets and 22 wadding. Most of them used various kinds of padding according to the tastes and resources of customers to what was thought suitable. For instance, flannel quilts were usually padded with wool or an old blanket. Print quilts were padded with cotton. Well, that's interesting. Wool is unquestionably a warmer material than cotton, but new cotton wool or wadding, in its fluffy state, should be effective in holding warm air. It is generally agreed, however, that a wool padding remains springier after washing. Cotton tends to felt and flatten so that the quilted pattern is difficult to see after much laundering. And I think my quilts are probably a perfect example of this. How it gets, the crinkles, and then you lose a little bit of the quilting. But, I mean, within the quilting you can feel, and it's not felted by any means, it's just clump. It's all clumped up. Wool is generally a lighter material than cotton, but the amount of wadding used in a quilt does not weigh a great deal more than a similar thickness of wool padding. For instance, a full-size quilt, thinly padded, would need 9 yards of wadding, weighing about 2¼ pounds, or from 1 3/4 to 2 pounds of wool. Thickly padded, in the old-fashioned style, it might have as much as 24 yards of wadding, 6 pounds, or 4 pounds of wool. Yeah. Lightness of weight was not always considered an advantage, for many quilters of a former generation definitely aimed at something heavy to put on the bed. And that reminds me of my mom. When she was a kid, going to visit family down south, and I mean, granted, we're talking about like South Carolina, where it doesn't get, it doesn't snow much down there. In the mountainous regions, like where my grandmother's from, it's definitely colder at night in the winter. But so, they would load quilts up on the bed, and there were several quilts, as well as this like specific coverlet that was made of sock tops from the stocking factory. They would all fight. The kids would fight over who got to sleep under those. And she said the old ones, the really old quilts, were these just massively heavy, big things. And she was like, you'd get in bed and like you could, like your little body couldn't roll over because they were so heavy. I think we look for lighter weight things today simply because we have, access to synthetics that can be light. So yeah, I think the idea of something heavy is just, it's synonymous with warmth, I guess. The outstanding advantage of cotton wool or wadding is that it is bought ready for use. Sheep's wool must first be thoroughly scoured to remove dirt and grease. It can be bought clean scoured for quilting from some of the Welsh woolen mills, but even then it may need further washing. Oh gosh, that would be a hassle. If you had to wash your quilt, your batting, would you ever finish a quilt? I would. I need to get it out of the package, lay it out, stretch it to make sure it's flat, and that's it. It must next be carded to lay the staple evenly and then spread bit by bit on the material, being carefully scrutinized for dark specks of grease which would make marks on the quilt. A good deal of time must also have been spent in picking the hard seeds out of the early cotton wool, for they are liable to interrupt the passage of the needle. But even so, this padding must have been less troublesome to deal with than wool, and that probably accounts for its popularity as soon as it was easily available to the ordinary village or farmhouse quilter. Possibly, too, many quilters found difficulty in getting suitable wool to line their quilts, for it should be soft, not coarse, and lamb's wool is best. Some Welsh wool is suitable, but not all, and for instance, the wool from Weardale, a great quilting district, is said to be much too harsh. The Rural Industries Bureau urged the use of wool in quilts made for their marketing scheme, but no suitable supply could be found in the north, and it was sent from South Wales to quilters in County Durham. They returned to wadding after the close of the Bureau's scheme. Oh, interesting. Let's see. I may put a pin in it there because she's going on and on about more. Oh, no, actually, I'm sorry. I think it's really only a page and a half. Oh, no, it's not. I'm sorry. Yeah, I think I'll close off there. On Thursday, we can look at the other things she's talking about. So she's talking about blankets and things like that. So yeah, I'll end right there, and then we'll pick up page 90 in case I forget. So I hope this has been interesting. What do you guys think? I'm going to recombobulate my screens. Oh, Marianne. Yeah. Okay. So I think around page 68, I was looking at an Internet Archive book, but likely past that. Oh, I can't remember. You must have commented, and I've forgotten what you were commenting about. I'm sorry. And you said flax. Oh, yes. Maybe. Could flax be phlox? I'm not sure, but I'm still gonna kind of go with the it being down or feathers versus flax. I could be wrong though. When I make suppositions, I make guesses. You guys correct me. And by the way, is this book still on the Internet Archive? I couldn't find it. Not too long ago, I looked for it. I happen to have a copy of it that I downloaded before the Internet Archive faced all of that, all those issues with, copyright and stuff, and they had to pull off a lot of books. So it is entirely possible it's still out there. I mean, this is an old book. I can't imagine that there's any copyright holders out there going like, no, you can't have Mavis Fitzrandolph's book online. So yeah, if you guys want to follow along, look for it in the Internet Archive. All right, guys, I'm going to end there. I hope this was interesting. I definitely learned some things about Colonial Williamsburg. And I was just thinking, I need to get down there. Oh, thank you, Marianne. Awesome. So it is out there. Yeah, I need to get back down to Williamsburg. So right before the pandemic, I went down there for another purpose. Let's see. You're asking, do you have the wrong book? Let me see. Nope, that's it. Yeah, that's it. Traditional quilting, its story and its practice. Yep. This might be, I mean, this could be a different volume than I've got. I don't think it is, though. I think it's the same one. So you might have been referring to that page that was blank. We'll have to go back and read that on Thursday. Okay, guys. I hope you have a wonderful week. I hope to see you on Thursday. Jill and I have another day of hijinks and shenanigans tomorrow night. So yeah. Absolutely. Anytime you guys can get the books that I'm reading, either if you want to buy them to read along or if you can get them on the Internet Archive or whatever, please do. Because I think that it's helpful to me that, like, sometimes you guys follow along and can catch things that I miss as I'm trying to speed through my reading. All right, guys. Have a good week. I'll see you soon. Hope to see you tomorrow on Quilt Nerding or here on Thursday. Same bat time, same cake channel. Bye, guys.